Hunting Big with Steve Bartilla. Brought to you by
We've been pretty darn effectively trained to think of any food plot as, oh man, you'll be lucky to catch movement that first hour of daylight and that last half hour before dark of anything mature at all. Well, that is true to an extent, but that really applies way more to open food sources. This food source I'm standing in here right now, it's a honey hole plot. As a side note, that scrape tree there, I need to replace the branches on after I'm done giving this tip. And I'll go ahead and slap a scrape dripper up there as well, because as I speak, one of my buddies happens to be prepping the tree stand right over there. So this happens to be a nice little 20-yard shot. Sure does work great for positioning them and focusing their attention, but that's really not what we're talking about today. Today what we're talking about is food sources. This food source here, this is like being in the middle of the woods. This is no, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about a food plot like this. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a half-acre meadow in the big woods, or not that they ever occur, but a small clear cut in a big woods, an oak ridge, dropping acorns. There's all sorts of food sources that are actually hit during daylight. What most people don't realize, everybody knows that whitetails move most right before dark and right after first light. Okay, there's actually 5 peak movement periods for whitetails. Okay, those are 2 of them. Once in midday, twice at night. Okay, twice at night, what they're doing is they're alternating between bedding down and chewing cud and feeding. During the day, what they're doing is they're getting up for a midday snack. Now, most of that feeding actually occurs within their daylight core area. But when you're dealing with plots like this, with this corn over here, this is like a little half-acre meadow in the middle of the woods. Mr. Big, as long as it's not pressured, is not afraid to step out into this during daylight. As a matter of fact, in November, he has no issue coming out here at noon to check it for does. Same with those isolated food sources, those remote food sources in the big woods. Yes, most feeding tends to occur in the morning and evening, but there is that midday peak movement period as well. And plots like this actually work quite nicely for them. Final thoughts, brought to you by Huntworth. For good reason, we've been trained that if you're going to hunt food sources, man, it's either in the morning or or right before dark. You know, your morning sit or your PM sit, because, geez, mature animals are not entering the wide open during shooting light during the middle of the day, and that is generally, to an extent, generally true. But when you're looking at isolated food sources that are completely surrounded by cover, remember, there's 5 peak movement periods in any 24-hour cycle. There are the evening and the morning for feeding, okay, that we all know of. There's the 2 in the middle of the night, transitioning between bedding, chewing their cud, and feeding more, okay? And then there's 1 midday. That midday, they're getting up, they're getting a snack, maybe getting a drink of water. When you're dealing with an isolated food source completely surrounded by cover, be it a food plot, be it a meadow in the big woods, I'll tell you what, especially during the rut, do not be afraid to hunt them, because you're essentially hunting in the middle of deer cover.